The Steam Deck is already obsolete. The Steam Deck is changing console gaming. The Steam Deck has transformed PC gaming. The Steam Deck needs exclusives. In the blandest year for PC gaming tech, only the Steam Deck took a risk. This is not how I expected the Steam Deck to end the year. There were more Steam Deck hot takes than a Fandom Deck timeline, but these came from major publications like PC Gamer, PC Games News, GameSpot, and Linus Tech Tips. Steam Deck was the absolute topic in the last week of the year. Did a bunch of people get Steam Decks for Christmas or something? Is that why all these videos and articles were published at about the same time? Most of these pieces of content were pretty good, some of them not so much. So let's talk about these, and I'll also give you the latest Steam Deck news. By the way, the winter sale is still happening right now, so you know I've got to hit you with trailers for hidden gems. Check the info in the top right badge for the discount info too. Oh yeah, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, that's enough of that. Let's start with the pair of GameSpot pieces. One piece talked about how Steam Deck transformed PC gaming, and the other spoke of how the Steam Deck is changing console gaming. And that may sound counterintuitive to some people, but I think both are absolutely correct. I'm not going to rehash the discussion about whether or not the Steam Deck is a console, but I'll say this: it takes the best of both worlds to create an experience we haven't had before. A lot of the PC folks are only able to see a console for its worst qualities. PC gamers will say consoles are nothing but walled gardens that give a lockdown experience. And while that is true, it disregards what draws so many people to consoles in the first place. People don't buy a console because they want a lockdown experience. They're just willing to deal with that for the benefits of console gaming. That is a streamlined and fluid gaming experience. And that brings us to how the Steam Deck has transformed PC gaming. Here's what Alessandro Barbosa had to say on the subject, quote, "In the same way that it was almost impossible to not recommend a Nintendo Switch purchase, the same can easily be said for the Steam Deck on the eve of its first anniversary. It has become one of the simplest ways to get into PC gaming, allowing you to get up and running with a brand new Steam account for play on the go or a new home for your existing library to be stored in. It does this without compromising on what it means to play games on PC either, recontextualizing the perceived barrier of entry you're required to overcome simply to enjoy this space. By streamlining the entire process of installing a game and getting to play it while also offering a customizable environment to do pretty much everything else, the Steam Deck is a captivating device for a wide audience that will surely inform the future of PC gaming for some time." End quote. I've got to agree with everything about this. It's almost impossible to not recommend the Steam Deck, and the reason for that is because it takes the flexibility of PC gaming and makes it more accessible to the average person, making it a device that's going to appeal to an extremely wide audience. So then how is the Steam Deck changing console gaming? For that, we'll have to go to this GameSpot video put together by Kurt and Davina. To kick things off, Kurt says that the Steam Deck is causing him to rethink what a console is in the first place.
But something else happened this year which has had me questioning the entire concept of what even makes a video game console. This thing.
And Kurt goes on to point out that while Microsoft and Sony are fighting tooth and nail to have a large stable of exclusives, he's able to play a Sony exclusive on Valve's handheld PC with an Xbox controller, and that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Mind you, he was initially skeptical of the Steam Deck, and I've talked about that a lot on this channel, the journey of going from a Steam Deck skeptic to having it rock your world. And the thing that makes you a skeptic at first is that you think you know what to expect. It's just a PC after all, right? But I'm sure at this point many of you would agree that the Steam Deck is not just the sum of its parts. It's not just a PC. If that were the case, then the disparity of sales between the Steam Deck and other handheld PCs wouldn't be so high. I mean, yeah, the Steam Deck is much more affordable, but we're talking about 1 million units sold versus you're lucky to sell 5,000 units. The gulf between those two is much larger than just an affordable price. Steam Deck is a powerful handheld device with an amazing price that has virtually any input method you could ever need, and it combines the flexibility, openness, and unending library of the PC with the fluidity of a console. And that's a mouthful. No one would ever choose that as a marketing slogan. But the point is that all the overwhelming benefits of PC gaming usually come at the cost of ease of use. Not so anymore. And so the Steam Deck is transforming gaming for PC gamers and is transforming gaming for console gamers. It's literally a paradigm shift, and I'm curious to see how it will impact gaming in years to come. But if all that is true, then how can some people ask the question, is the Steam Deck already obsolete? That's the question being asked in the latest video from TechWiki, one of the many channels over at Linus Media Group. This one was hosted by the lovable Linux enthusiast Anthony. This video once again is born from the question of, do we hold the Steam Deck to the standards of a PC, or do we hold it to the standards of a console? And the answer, once again, is neither, I think. If we hold the Steam Deck to the standards of the PC, then yeah, the Steam Deck will be obsolete pretty soon because, as Anthony points out,
it's no secret that PC hardware ages in the minds of gamers much more quickly than consoles do. The typical console has a lifespan of around 5 years, give or take a year or so, but PC gamers tend to upgrade their hardware every 2 years. or at least this was the case before the pandemic.
Certainly Valve and AMD are capable of making a more powerful version of the Steam Deck as early as this year if that's what they wanted to do, but Valve has made very clear that's not what they want, and they really like having a single hardware spec for developers to target and for gamers to understand what will work well and what won't. That won't be possible if a new Steam Deck model is available every year like every other PC gaming hardware. Does that mean that the Steam Deck's lifespan will be as long as the consoles? Will it be 5+ years until we get a Steam Deck 2? I mean, who knows, but I personally would bet against that. I think 3 years is a nice sweet spot for the new Steam Deck, but that's just me. What do you think is the right time for Valve to make a new Steam Deck? Let me know in the comments. One last thing I found interesting about this video is that Anthony didn't even address any of the would-be competition like the Aya Neo 2 and GPD Wiz 4. These are the first PC handhelds that really seem to be an upgrade over the Steam Deck when held to the standards of PC hardware. But like I said earlier, the Steam Deck is way more than the sum of its parts and can't only be looked at from the same lens as other PC hardware. Maybe that's why PC Games News thinks the Steam Deck needs exclusives. Alright, I'm not gonna lie, this headline was pretty baffling, but the article itself wasn't quite as bad as the headline would lead you to believe. Here's what the author Ryan Easby had to say. Quote, "The Steam Deck is basically perfect. Sure, it could use some software up, but the hardware is incredible and it has the most extensive back catalog of any new device. What would ascend the Steam Deck to next level is some incredible exclusives, even if they're smaller games like the aforementioned Aperture Desk Job. The ideal Steam Deck exclusive would take full advantage of all the technology available while also bringing something new to the table. Similar to how a game such as Astro's Playroom show off the sheer capabilities of the PlayStation 5 and DualSense controller while also being a full game. Don't get me wrong, Aperture Desk Job is great, but it's no more than an hour long and acts more as a tech demo than a full game, whereas Astro's Playroom feels like a full platformer." End quote. Okay, so I hate the word exclusive here. It really calls people to focus on the wrong thing. Even one of the principal developers over at Valve, Pierre Loup, chimed in with an appropriate reply on Twitter. But if we remove the word exclusive entirely, I personally would love a game that takes full advantage of the Steam Deck's control and features, something that's meatier than Aperture Desk Job. I adore Astro's Playroom, and I would love to see something like that on the Steam Deck. One idea we've kicked around in the Fan2Deck Discord is a WarioWare style collection of microgames that utilize the full suite of Steam Deck controls. That would be sick. Games like these are not exclusive, and that's really not a word that should have been used here. You can play Aperture Desk Job on basically any PC, but I would love to see more games that make the most of what the Steam Deck has to offer. One other solid point made in the article is that Sony should work on porting their awesome handheld library. I'd love to see Tearaway, Gravity Rush, and Uncharted Golden Abyss on the Steam Deck. They'd be a perfect fit. Third parties need to port their Vita games too. We've got Persona 4 Golden, but what about Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops and Muramasa Rebirth? And while I'm already port begging, I'd like to formally request that Sony port the PS3 cult classic Tokyo Jungle. That game would be awesome on the Steam Deck. Alright y'all, it's that time, the biggest sale of the year and the best time to pick up some Steam Deck games. First, I'm going to recommend taking a look at Game Billet. These games redeem on Steam and they have the best deals I've seen on top AAA titles, plus they have a 5% coupon. First of all, they've got like 40% off all the PlayStation on PC games, including Spider-Man Remastered, Miles Morales, God of War, Uncharted, and Sackboy, but they also have deep discounts on top games from a wide variety of publishers. I mean games like Elden Ring, Scarlet Nexus, Deathloop, Dishonored, Doom Eternal, Ace Combat 7, Devil May Cry 5, Monster Hunter Rise, all of the Resident Evils, Control, Gotham Knights, and all the Arkham games, plus Sonic Frontiers, Persona 4, Persona 5, and Yakuza Like a Dragon are all available for like 40% off or more. All of these games are playable on deck, and I haven't seen this many top games at this level of discount in a really long time. I personally bought a bunch of stuff during the Steam sale too: Pentiment, Cruelty Squad, The Pedestrian, Kaz and the Wild Masks, Ender Lilies, Eastshade, Spiritfarer. These are all really great sales on really great games, not to mention all-time classics like Celeste, Ori Will of the Wisps, and Hades. Honestly, there are so many good games for sale that I could see people having choice paralysis. If you're in that boat, then just buy Grapple Dog, because it is one of the most underrated games of the year. Alright, let me hit you with some awesome tidbits of deck news from across the web this week. Alongside the winter sale, Steam is ending the year with the Steam Replay, a summary of your year of gaming on Steam in a format that's inspired by Spotify Wrapped. One of the standout pages from Steam Replay was this one that shows up if you played Steam Deck this year. It says, "Looks like you got a Steam Deck," and it shows your top 5 games with some high-level stats. According to this, I played nearly 150 games across almost 1,500 different sessions, and 79% of my playtime was on the Steam Deck. Mind you, I play a decent amount of offline gaming, and most of my non-deck playtime comes from testing different hardware or from making videos on this channel, so it's safe to say that I don't just talk a good game, I really do love the Steam Deck. That said, I saw a lot of variety from you all when you shared your Steam replays with me, and I think that is a beautiful thing because it shows how the Steam Deck is attracting an incredibly wide audience of people that are Windows gamers, Linux gamers, Mac gamers, VR gamers, or even console gamers. Everyone loves the Steam Deck, and the Steam Replay is a good example of that. One more year-end wrap-up for Steam was their Best of 2022. There was a category that showed the most played games on Steam Deck. The top 2 highlights of the Platinum tier are Hades and Cyberpunk, and I love that because once again it just shows how different these 2 games are. The rest of the top games for Steam Deck are similarly multifaceted with titles like Multiversus, Persona 5, No Man's Sky, Red Dead 2, Elden Ring, Stray, and the venerable Vampire Survivors. But the most impressive thing about the Best of 2022 is this fact pointed out by Valve employee Tom Giardino. He points out that in the last 3 years, the minimum number of active players needed to be in the top 100 played game of the year has quadrupled. In 2019, a game needed at least 10,000 concurrent players to break the top 100, but this year, a game would have needed at least 40,000. That is quite the impressive jump for Steam. There are also some really cool emulation related updates for the Steam Deck, and I think it's time for me to make an updated emulation video. First, there's been a holiday update to EmuDeck. This update released on December 18th, and it has some awesome additions like the autosave and autoload feature for RetroArch games, plus a new plugin called Decky Controls that allows you to see the EmuDeck hotkeys without having to leave gaming mode. And the update I find most interesting is that they included homebrew games. Homebrew games are non-commercial games made by indie developers for retro hardware, so EmuDeck and others have curated a list of homebrew games to install onto the Steam Deck. If you run the EmuDeck Holiday Update, it will give you the option to install homebrew games for Game Boy Color, Game Boy, Super Nintendo, NES, Master System, Genesis, and Game Gear. The quality of these games can be pretty hit or miss, but the supercut from EmuDeck gives you a good idea of what the best titles are, so I would recommend starting there. One thing to keep in mind is that EmuDeck sort of expects you to play these via Emulation Station. The fact of the matter is that because these are homebrew games, they usually don't exist on Steam GridDB, and so the developers of EmuDeck didn't want to have them added to Steam by default where they would make your collection look less pretty. As a result, you can either play these via Emulation Station or move the ROMs over yourself if you want to have Steam ROM Manager attempt to add them to Steam. Not ideal, but this is always a bit of a tricky situation. Also on the subject of emulation, there's a plugin called EmuAchievements that someone shared with me over on Twitter. This plugin puts retro achievements for your ROMs into the gaming mode interface, which is a really nice added feature for your retro collection on deck. Alright everyone, I hope you had a good holiday. I certainly took a little time to rest and rejuvenate, but I'm back better than ever with some major announcements coming soon, so stay tuned. Deck Gang out. Goodbye!